Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, can you tell us where you are right now and what is it that you experienced there at your office on Capitol Hill?
Right. Right now, I am locked in my office at Cannon, at the Cannon building. If you're in any building on the Capitol, the campus of the Capitol, you're in lockdown. My staff is here. No one is able to come and go because of the violence that's happening on the streets of the Capitol tonight. Earlier today, I was in the joint session of Congress where the vice president had started the process of really the ceremonial and administerial process of counting the votes of the Electoral College. And when that joint session recessed to debate the Arizona electors, I went back to Cannon and was unable to get back into my office because there was a pipe bomb delivered to the headquarters of the Republican Party. Once that pipe bomb was cleared, we were able to come back to the Cannon office building. But as the minute we got back into the office, we were put into lockdown because the protesters had breached the Capitol, were violently attacking the Capitol Police and law enforcement. And it's a sad day for America. I am disheartened. My heart is completely broken, and I'm angry. This is wrong. This is un-American. This isn't protesting. This is anarchy. And I'm begging the president to get off Twitter and to get on TV, to calm these people down, to ask them to follow the rule of law and ask them to go home. This is urgent. We can discuss voter fraud another day, but the violence has got to end.
Congresswoman, what is it that goes through your mind as someone who was just sworn in 3 days ago, who swore that oath of fidelity to the Constitution of the United States?
Right.
When you have witnessed what you saw today on Capitol Hill take place, it appears there is no reasoning with at least some of these demonstrators who have refused to leave in a lawful and peaceful manner.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was personally accosted last night on a street in D.C. And my motherly instincts this weekend when I was seeing some of the rhetoric, and make no mistake, I want to be very clear. Rhetoric has real consequences. I have been violently threatened on social media over the course of the last week. I was accosted last night on a street in D.C.
Can you tell us about that, Representative? I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, I had someone who drove up from my district, from South Carolina, to be here to peacefully protest. And the individual was upset that I was not going to object to certification of the Electoral College. Millions of people have been misled on the issue today. But my motherly instincts this weekend, I flew my kids up for the swearing in. This is a historic moment for us. But because of the rhetoric that I was seeing, I actually put my kids, who I was going to have stay up all week, I put them on the first flight home on Monday, because I was worried about what was seeing and hearing and the consequences of the words and of the rhetoric. And I warned my colleagues about this, and sadly it came to fruition today. It has consequences. And last night I was accosted by someone who disagreed with the certification of the election. And what it said to me, it didn't matter what I said. Millions of people have been misled. Millions of people were led to believe that Congress could unilaterally, single-handedly overthrow the results of the election vis-a-vis the Electoral College. That's entirely false. Millions of people were misled today that the vice president could somehow single-handedly overturn the results of the election. He stated this morning that that's not possible because of the Constitution. The reason I was going to certify the Constitution, the Electoral College today, because we're a republic. We follow our Constitution. We have 3 branches of government. Congress is not the judiciary. Congress is not the executive branch, and Congress isn't the state legislature who submits and certifies our elections and who submits the electors and their votes for the Electoral College. It's dishonest, and the expectations were very high. People who truly believed that after the vote today that Donald Trump would continue to be president, and nothing could be further from the truth. It's distressing. And when I see that the hearts and minds, and even worse, the wallets of millions of people were taken advantage over allegations of voter fraud over the last few weeks, it disgusts me. And I hope that my colleagues will reconsider how they vote, how they object once Congress reconvenes to address the objection to the first state, which is Arizona. And who knows when that's going to be? I don't know if that'll be today, tonight, or tomorrow, because we're still seeing protesters not leaving. I'm asking the president to get off Twitter, get on TV, ask these people to go home. It's time to stop.
So you mentioned the president. Who ultimately bears responsibility, in your view, for inciting violence?
It's not just one person. I believe there are multiple folks and politicians out there who have encouraged this kind of behavior, who misled the American people. And the words and language that we've seen, not only today, but over the course of the last week or so, it's not okay. And it's encouraged this violence. And it's un-American. We're better than this. I thought the Republican Party was the party of law and order, that we respected the police and law enforcement. And to see members of our own party, to see protesters violently attacking our police and our law enforcement today, my heart could not be any more sad.
You know, you mentioned this confrontation that you had with a constituent who, did I hear you correctly, drove from your district in South Carolina to be there for the protests. And it sounds as though they sought you out specifically because they understood your position.
Yeah, it was a completely random. They recognized me. I was walking outside on a sidewalk, and they recognized me. And I'll talk to anyone who wants to have a peaceful conversation. Even when we disagree, the American experiment demands that we can have a discussion, we can talk, we can debate, and we can agree to disagree. I have some folks who didn't understand why I was voting to certify the election and trying to explain the Constitution and what the role of Congress is in the Electoral College. Some people just don't care, and they want to take a Zippo lighter to the Constitution of the United States. And even though I didn't like the outcome of the presidential election, I'm a huge supporter of President Trump. I worked for him as early as 2015 when there was a crowded Republican field. I was one of his first hires on his campaign in the state of South Carolina. I gave up my life to go campaign for him. I gave up on, I lost friendships and business going to work for him all across the country, trying to get him elected. And to see these folks being misled in such a way, to think that Congress could overturn an election single-handedly, and we just can't. If we were to do that, if we were to eject the Electoral College, we would allow Nancy Pelosi 4 years from now to do the same thing to us, and we would never have a Republican president again. And that's why our founders were so smart. That's why they established a republic, not a democracy, where we have multiple branches of government, where we have checks and balances. The results of the Georgia election last night also was distressing, because now we don't have that check and balance. And the rhetoric we've seen on the far right encouraged people to either stay home because they didn't believe their vote mattered, or to say, hey, you know what, I'm leaving the Republican Party because I don't like the rhetoric. This is on us. We reap what we sow, and we have a lot to do to rebuild our party and rebuild our nation after tonight.
The president has released a recorded video on Twitter telling demonstrators to go home. Is that enough? What would you specifically like to see the president do?
He needs to get off Twitter. He needs to get on television. He needs to urgently ask. He needs to stop talking about voter fraud tonight. We're not having that conversation tonight. We need to ask these people to stop attacking our police, to stop violently attacking our law enforcement, our Capitol Police. We need to ask them to follow the rule of law. We need to ask them to go home. We can have a conversation another day about voter fraud. I'm one of those people who believe that there was voter fraud. There's fraud in every election. Some years it's worse than others. It's something we need to investigate, but we don't investigate it through the Electoral College. There's no way in hell that you can investigate voter fraud in an hour or 2 hour debate on the House of the floor of Congress. That is ridiculous. And to convince people otherwise is a lie. This has been one big lie. And we've seen members of our own party raising money off of this issue and not using it to support the president or to fight voter fraud at all. It disgusts me. I'm sick and tired of it. He needs to encourage these people to be peaceful and to peacefully go home.
So you talked earlier about this notion of misleading the American people on this idea of what can and cannot actually be done. I do want to ask you about the letter to which you were a signatory, in which you did spell out that you do not support the idea of objecting to the certification of these Electoral College votes, because you began that letter, Congresswoman, with this notion that there are, quote unquote, from the letter, significant abuses in our election system, resulting resulting from the reckless adoption of mail-in ballots and the lack of safeguards maintained to guarantee that only legitimate votes are cast and counted. And that language there would seem to suggest that you do believe there were significant abuses in the election system. Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, no, there were voter irregularities. And in fact, I have know folks in for example, the Pennsylvania legislature, where I have tried to learn, observe, research, ask questions. There are irregularities. The irregularities of voter fraud in Pennsylvania are systematic. They are not new to 2020. These are things that have been going on for years. We see different levels of voter fraud in different elections. I know in my own elections, we've seen machines stop working. We've seen issues with absentee ballot signatures. We've seen mass mail-in ballots to people who are dead or who've moved to other states and are registered to vote elsewhere. There are issues, and I think if we deny that, we're doing a disservice to millions of Americans. This is an issue that we need to investigate. We need to look into, and where there were profound issues, and we need to address those. But you cannot address it in a electoral college. Congress's sole role was to open the envelopes, to count the electoral votes. It's ceremonial in nature today. There's nothing that Congress can do to investigate voter fraud in a vote of the Electoral College. It doesn't exist. I've read every line of the Constitution applicable to the executive branch and the Electoral College and the presidential election. I've read the 12th Amendment, Article 1, Section 2. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 clearly spells this out. The Electoral College Act of 1887 that was codified in Title III of the U.S. Code is also very explicit. What I have seen from some of these politicians is that they are taking advantage of the hearts, minds, and wallets of so many hardworking Americans, giving a voice to that anger. And there are a lot of us who are frustrated in the Republican Party. I'm one of those people. But I'm not going to condone or advocate for violence. I'm not going to condone the rhetoric that has led to the protests, the violent protests that happened today. It's un-American. It's anarchy. This is not protesting. And these people need to follow the law. They need to go home.
But can you see how that kind of language, though, could lead some to make that jump, to make the claim and to believe when the president says the election, was stolen from him, that they would be so moved to the point where they would take such action as to storm the United States Capitol and engage in violence against law enforcement? But does that not contribute, I guess, is there any connection?
No, investigating voter fraud is not condoning or encouraging violence. I think that is a legitimate thing to have a debate, a discussion, a commission, an investigation. These are things that should happen. But there is a time and a place to do that. Today was not the time and the place to do that. And even at the rally today, we heard violent rhetoric encouraging this kind of behavior. We heard it not only today, we've heard it over the last week or so from folks who are frustrated, upset, and angry. And that is what led us to today. And when I saw some of this rhetoric happening in the last week or so, I sent my kids home. My kids were here for the week because they're not able to go to school because of COVID. I said, if I'm flying them up for my swearing in, I might as well keep them up here for the week for virtual school. But I sent them home the first flight Monday morning because I was worried because of the rhetoric that was coming out of the far right, what that might encourage today. And unfortunately, my biggest nightmare came true, and it needs to end.
And Congresswoman, before we let you go, very quickly, what's your understanding of what happens now with respect to a time frame? Are you expecting that later on tonight you will, in fact, be called upon to go back into session?
I heard a rumor that we might go back this evening, but right now I think it's really going to be predicated on what's going on the Capitol grounds outside. That'll determine our timeline. I'm really encouraging who have engaged in the rhetoric encouraging this behavior, the folks who are objecting that have no grounds to object to an electoral college that was certified, an election that was certified in 50 states. When you read the Constitution, this needs to stop. And I'm encouraging my colleagues to stop with the games, to follow the Constitution, to follow the rule of law, because we're better than this.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Congresswoman, again, we're very glad to see that you're safe. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
No, thank you.